Hey guys and gals, today I want to talk about EFI versus carburetors. I'm getting a lot of calls from customers, people inquiring about the carburetor versus an EFI system. So basically everybody knows you got your basic carburetor on the older cars. That's what they all came with. And then they had a mechanical fuel pump, and then they went up to the carburetor. And in that system, they had rubber, say like from your fuel pump up to the carburetor. And there are certain things in today's fuel has ethanol in it, 10% on the average, I think. There's going to be some people that's going to tell you that it has nothing to do, doesn't bother the butyl rubber, doesn't do anything. But something I wanted to share is there's two things before the fuel reaches the carburetor that the ethanol basically attacks. The first thing is the fuel pump. This is a mechanical style fuel pump. And this is basically on all your V8s, 6 cylinders, 4 cylinders, whatever, from all the way up from the 50s, 40s, whatever, all the way up until they went into the EFI. As people know, this is a mechanical device, a mechanical fuel pump, and it has a rubber diaphragm in here. This rubber diaphragm is susceptible to the ethanol, and what happens is over time that ethanol rapidly deteriorates this butyl rubber piece in here. And most of the time when you watch a lot of these shows on YouTube, and you'll see that they can't get the fuel pump to pump fuel up to the carburetor. Well, gas is set in here, and if it's had any kind of ethanol, it's destroyed that diaphragm in here. Most of your older cars, people have them as basically a toy, and they'll let them sit, and that ethanol will also evaporate. And they have to put fuel down the carburetor. And I can't tell you, including my own car, how many fuel pumps I had to go through to figure this out. And it was not just on my car, it was on many customers' cars. This is a diaphragm, a Holley accelerator pump diaphragm. I think this is a 50cc, but nonetheless, carburetors will have a rubber diaphragm. It could be, whether it's in a Holley, whether it's in an Edelbrock, whether it's in a Quadrajet, a Thermoquad. As you can see, this is rubber right here. It's a rubber product. I couldn't tell you exactly what rubber it is, but what happens is you'll see carburetors, when they sit up, they go to pump the gas, there's nothing that happens. What happens is this thing, when you pump the gas, the little lever's hitting the plate under here. It pushes fuel up into the squirters and provides fuel so you get the thing to start. Well, that ethanol will attack those as well. So there's two things right there that's affecting the carburetor and the mechanical fuel system. Now you can put an electric pump on a carburetor, and that's a big help. But how many people want to go in and wire an electric fuel pump, and maybe they're loud, or how reliable are they? Then that leads us to EFI. So with EFI, obviously you have a fuel pump. The fuel pump automatically introduces fuel pressure up to the injectors. So there's two types of basic EFI systems, at least that I deal with. Most of what pretty much everything until here coming in the very soon near future is a throttle body style EFI system. Now, this is not a throttle body injection system. This is just a throttle body for a direct port EFI system. This is a Gen 3 Hemi. LSs have this. You can see these injectors are going into the ports. The snipers, which is the majority of what we install, the Holley snipers, will be a throttle body that has injectors in each bore. Usually it can be anywhere from 4, I think maybe to 2, up to I think the Super Sniper is 8. But the pros and cons. So the pros to each and the cons to each. For the carburetor, the pros are that a new carburetor is probably going to be anywhere from, I don't know, $450 to $800, depending if it's, you know, an Edelbrock or a Holly. They're both good carburetors, by the way. They're both good carburetors. But that's the pros. If you're already set up for a mechanical fuel system, you know, that's a pro, is the price. Here's the con. The con is, the downside on the carburetor is that if you don't drive the car very often and you let it sit, that fuel is going to evaporate out of the bowls. Eventually it's going to attack your mechanical fuel pump. And eventually it's going to attack your accelerator pump. Now, for whatever reason, the more you drive it, obviously you keep this pliable and you keep the mechanical pump pliable, they're going to last a lot longer. I will tell you that. Another thing is, when it comes to tuning a carburetor, you need to have a screwdriver, you need to have a vacuum gauge, and you need to have a timing lock. Very, very simple. But you have to keep it in tune. Another thing is when you have a choke. Now I'm talking about street cars, I'm not talking about drag cars, I'm just talking about street cars. A lot of times you still have to keep that choke adjusted, whether it's electric or mechanical. The thing is as temperature, we have seasons, we have the summer and we have the winter. Oftentimes you're going to have to change the fast idle on that choke to compensate for the cold air or the warm air. So you're going to do a lot of adjusting to it. You just are. But they got us up for heck how many decades before EFI came along. Now, I'm going to also say this. The two best things you can do to your older car, your older ride, in my experience, is EFI and an overdrive. And then I'm going to tell you why. An EFI system is going to always compensate for altitude. It's going to compensate for temperature. It's going to compensate for a lot of things. And it's very friendly to go in and adjust. It keeps itself where it needs to be. In other words, you set the AFR, you set all the parameters, it's going to be set. If it's 18 degrees outside, you go out, and once that EFI system's working, it's going to be like a newer car. You're going to go out and you're going to fire it up. I have a 512 cubic inch big block out there that fought me with a carburetor, with a quick fuel, with a Holly. It didn't matter. It was very cantankerous when it was cold. I put the Holly EFI system on it, and it doesn't matter how cold it is, how hot it is, how long it has sat. It can sit for months and I can go turn the key and it fires right up. Carburetors are just not going to do that. They're just not going to do that, especially in this day and age. So, pros to the EFI system are reliability, the tuning, and I'd say just overall the making the car pleasant to drive. Your accelerator circuit, you know, once that's all dialed in, it just makes the car so even across the RPM range. Again, I'm talking about a street car. It makes it really like more of a modern car. You don't have to have a Gen 3 Hemi or an LS or a Coyote. You can take your traditional small block Chevy, small block Ford, small block Mopar, big blocks. You can make them behave very similar to a newer car. Now here's the cons to an EFI system. Is cost. Obviously, cost is a big thing. So you go into an entry level, the new and improved Sniper system. I think it's around $1,200, $1,300. I can't remember. Just for the Sniper. And then you've got your fuel system. I always highly recommend to have the EFI fuel tank, so it bolts back up into the car and everything's self-contained like a newer car. Now, when you get into something like this, and yes, obviously my stanchions aren't correct. This is just mocked up, people, okay? But you get into something like this that's gonna require separate injectors, your fuel logs, your fuel rails, all your little, basically, you're gonna have to have a throttle body, your intake. It's gonna be a lot more expensive. Then you have to have a terminator system or something to run that injector setup. But you can do that with a traditional V8. You can get an intake manifold and drill it and do the same thing that we're doing here with this engine. So, like I said, in my opinion, in today's time, the two best things you can do to your car are an overdrive and an EFI system. The overdrive, we've talked about that in other videos, but long story short, I don't want my stuff buzzing at 3,500 RPM trying to keep up with minivans and Honda Civics doing 70, 75 mile an hour. So that's the overdrive discussion. But going back to the EFI, if you can make the purchase, it will totally change your experience on that car, on how it responds, how it drives. You go to the Sonic and the drive-in, and you don't have to worry about vapor lock. That's another thing, vapor lock. This new fuel, especially during the summer times, especially in the South, it has a boil point that's much lower than the traditional gasoline that didn't have ethanol in it. I think it's like 20 degrees lower. So it's August, and you've got your, you're driving your big block Chevelle to the drive-in, and when you kill that thing, that engine's gonna start getting hotter because there's no coolant going through it. It's just sitting there getting hotter under the hood. That fuel is boiling, it's cooking. You go to fire it back up, and then, man, it's taking forever. You can't get any fuel because you're sucking vapor. Now, yes, there are many ways I know that, to get around that, clothespins, well, I guess whatever. I'm not really big into that. But you have an EFI system, you got your 429 Cobra Jet, and it's 105 degrees out. You pull up somewhere, and you've got an EFI system. That electric pump's going to alleviate all of that vapor lock. So again, there's the pros and the cons. The biggest thing is on the carburetors is the cost, I would say, and you're going to be adjusting it. It's not always going to stay in tune. They just don't. They never did. I think that our memories are very selective when we remember these cars and how they ran. I grew up in the era of carburetors. Our cars had carburetors and they ran well. But I remember my dad having to pull the carburetor off from time to time every couple of years and rebuild them, whether it was a 2-barrel or a 4-barrel. That's just the way they were. So we have selective memory. And then when you get in your multiple carburation, geez, big difference. I do remember, at least for my lifetime, when fuel injection and EFI, but basically even before electronic, they had fuel injection, and then it went to EFI. Your cars that had EFI were such an improvement. I think back on the 5-liter Mustangs, the Buick Grand National, the IROC Camaros. It took those engines to another level in performance, and it was they turned into something that was just really fascinating, as how they would always start, and the lower end torque that they had. And the fuel economy. That's another thing we haven't discussed here, is you're just going to get better fuel economy here with the EFI system than you are with this carburetor. Now, you get into drag racing, which I love, then all bets are off. Drag racing, you go to your big Holly, it's very adjustable. Carburetors are still, I would say, are the dominant force on a drag strip. That doesn't mean, though, the guys out there with the laptops that are out there tuning with their laptops, especially they have a turbo or a supercharger on it, that's another story. That takes you to a whole new level. But again, pros and cons on EFI versus carburetor. I'm trying to make this as simple as I can for people to make that decision. I personally highly encourage you, if you can do the EFI system, to do it. And that way you're driving your ride and not working on it, bent over the fender well. So it's about to rain here in Oklahoma. So we probably better go ahead and get ready to put up. But I hope this helps everybody. If anybody has any questions, put any comments in here. Please subscribe to our channel. Again, I am all for people commenting, and I am all for dissent. And if you have a different opinion, or if you think that I'm wrong in some way, tell me, and I'll have the conversation. I'd love to have the conversation. So, hope everybody has a great Friday or a great Thursday. Thanks, everybody.